The door swung open, and I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stood there, bare as the day I was born, water dripping from my hair onto the hardwood floor of my tiny Brooklyn apartment. Caleb, my best friend since high school, stood in the doorway, his police uniform crisp, his eyes wide with shock, and something else I couldn't name. "Ethan, what the—" His voice caught, and his badge slipped from his pocket, clattering to the floor beside me. That small, metallic thud echoed louder than it should have. A sound that marked the moment everything I thought I knew about us began to unravel. For years, I'd buried my feelings for Caleb, convinced they'd stay locked away in the quiet corners of my heart. But now, with his blue eyes locked on mine and the weight of that badge between us, I knew there was no going back. I'd always known Caleb was straight. He was the golden boy of our small Ohio town, quarterback, prom king, the guy every girl wanted and every guy wanted to be. I was the quiet one, the artist with paint-stained fingers and a secret I'd never dared speak. When we moved to New York together after high school, I thought I could keep my feelings in check. We were just friends, best friends. He got a job with the NYPD, and I landed a gig teaching art at a community center. Our lives fit together like puzzle pieces, or so I thought. That night, though, something shifted. The air in my apartment felt too heavy, too charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I grabbed a towel from the chair, wrapping it around my waist, my cheeks burning. "Dude, you could knock," I muttered, trying to laugh it off, but my voice shook. Caleb didn't laugh. He didn't even move to pick up his badge. He just stood there, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his jaw tight. I didn't mean to." He stopped, running a hand through his short blonde hair. "I was just coming to check on you. You didn't answer my texts." I glanced at my phone on the counter, its screen dark. I'd been lost in my thoughts, sketching late into the night, trying to drown out the ache I felt every time I saw Caleb with his girlfriend, Sarah. "Yeah, sorry," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Got caught up." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The badge still lay on the floor, a silent accusation. I bent to pick it up, my fingers brushing the cold metal. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of his life, his duty, his identity. I handed it to him, our fingers grazing for a split second. That touch sent a jolt through me, and I hated myself for it. "Thanks," he said, his voice low. He clipped the badge back onto his belt, but his eyes didn't leave mine. There was something in them I'd never seen before. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe even fear. "Ethan, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. Those words never meant anything good. I tightened the towel around me, suddenly hyper-aware of my vulnerability. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, but my heart was racing. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor where his badge had fallen. "About us," he said finally, and the world tilted beneath my feet. I didn't know what he meant. Not yet. But those two words cracked open a door I'd spent years trying to keep shut. Caleb was my best friend, the one constant in my life, the one person I could never risk losing. But as he stood there, his uniform a stark reminder of the walls between us, I realized I wasn't the only one hiding something. The next hour passed in a blur. Caleb sat on my worn-out couch, his elbows on his knees, staring at the coffee table like it held the answers to whatever he was wrestling with. I threw on a t-shirt and jeans, trying to act normal, but the air between us buzzed with unspoken questions. He told me about a call he'd responded to earlier that day, a hate crime in the village, a gay couple attacked outside a bar. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he spoke. "I see this stuff on the job, Ethan," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "People getting hurt just for being who they are. It messes with me." He paused, swallowing hard. "And then I come here, and I see you, and I don't know what to think anymore." My breath caught. Was he saying what I thought he was? Or was I reading too much into it, letting my own desperate hopes twist his words? I wanted to ask, but fear glued my tongue to the roof of my mouth. Instead, I nodded, letting him talk. He told me about growing up in Ohio, about the expectations that had shaped him. His dad, a retired cop, drilling into him what it meant to be a man. He talked about Sarah, how she was perfect on paper but how something always felt off. "I don't know if I'm who I'm supposed to be," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him I understood. But I couldn't. Not when my own secret was clawing its way to the surface, threatening to ruin everything. So I just listened, my heart pounding, as Caleb peeled back layers of himself I'd never seen before. By the time he left, the sky outside was bruising purple, the city humming with its usual restless energy. He stood at the door, his hand on the knob, and looked back at me. "I'm glad you're my friend, Ethan," he said, and the words felt like a knife and a lifeline all at once. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my easel, sketching his face from memory, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. I wondered if he'd ever look at me the way I looked at him, and I wondered what he'd meant by us. The next few days were a tightrope walk. Caleb texted me like nothing had happened, but every message felt loaded, like he was testing the waters. I threw myself into work, teaching kids at the community center how to blend colors and capture light on canvas. But my mind kept drifting back to that night. On Friday, he showed up at the center unannounced, still in his uniform, his patrol car parked outside. The kids swarmed him, asking about his badge, his gun, his handcuffs. He grinned, answering their questions with the easy charm that had always made him larger than life. But when his eyes met mine across the room, that grin faltered, and I saw it again, that flicker of something unspoken. After class, we walked to a diner down the street, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like regret. He ordered a burger. I got a milkshake. We sat in a booth by the window, the neon sign outside casting red and blue light across his face. "You've been quiet," he said, cutting through the silence. I shrugged, stirring my milkshake with the straw. "Just busy." It was a lie, and he knew it. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and searching, but I couldn't meet it, not when I was terrified of what I might see. "Ethan," he said, leaning forward, his voice low, "what's going on with you? You've been different." I wanted to laugh. Different? I'd been in love with him for years, carrying that weight like a stone in my chest. But I couldn't say that. Instead, I deflected. "You're the one who dropped a bombshell the other night," I said, forcing a smile. "What's going on with you?" He leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been thinking a lot. About the job, about everything." He paused, his eyes flicking to the window, where the city pulsed beyond the glass. "I see guys like those ones in the village, living their truth, and I wonder if I've ever been honest with myself." My heart stuttered. Was he saying he wasn't straight? Or was he just questioning the life he'd built? I needed to know, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked, "What do you mean?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I don't know, man. I feel like I'm playing a role sometimes. The cop, the boyfriend, the son. Like I'm checking boxes instead of living." I nodded, my throat tight. I knew that feeling too well, the pressure to be someone I wasn't, to hide the parts of myself that didn't fit. But I couldn't tell him that. Not yet. So I changed the subject, asking about his latest shift. And he let me, though his eyes said he wasn't done with the conversation. That night, I went to a gay bar in the village with some friends from the art scene. I didn't tell Caleb. I needed space, a place where I could breathe without the weight of my feelings for him. The bar was loud, crowded, alive with laughter and music. I danced with a guy named Leo, who had kind eyes and a quick smile. For a moment, I let myself forget Caleb, let myself feel free. But then I saw him, Caleb, standing at the edge of the crowd, still in his civilian clothes but unmistakable. His eyes locked on mine, and the room seemed to shrink around us. Leo's hand was on my arm, but all I could see was Caleb, his face unreadable. "What are you doing here?" I asked when I reached him, my voice barely audible over the music. "I followed you," he said, and the honesty in his voice hit me like a punch. "I needed to see. I don't know. I needed to see you." My heart raced. "Why?" He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But then he pulled back, his face a storm of emotions. "I shouldn't be here," he said, and before I could stop him, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, my pulse pounding, Leo forgotten. Caleb had followed me. He'd seen me in a place where I was unapologetically myself, and he hadn't run away, not entirely. But what did it mean? Was he curious? Confused? Or was he just trying to understand the parts of me I'd kept hidden? I went home alone, my mind spinning. I didn't sleep. Instead, I painted. A chaotic swirl of blues and reds, Caleb's face hidden in the strokes. I didn't know what was happening between us, but I knew it was a turning point, and I was terrified of what came next. The next morning, I woke to a text from Caleb. "Can we talk? My place tonight." My stomach churned as I typed back a quick sure. I spent the day in a fog, my paintbrush trembling as I tried to focus on a mural at the community center. Every stroke felt like a question I didn't have the courage to ask. Caleb's apartment was in Queens, a small, tidy space that smelled of coffee and leather. He opened the door in jeans and a faded NYPD t-shirt, his hair damp from a shower. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, stepping inside, my heart hammering. His place was familiar. Countless nights spent playing video games or watching bad action movies. But tonight, it felt different. Charged. Dangerous. We sat on his couch, a beer in his hand, a soda in mine. He didn't waste time. "Last night," he started, his eyes fixed on the bottle. "I didn't mean to freak you out. I saw you at the bar, and it hit me how much I don't know about you." I swallowed, my throat dry. "You know me better than anyone," I said, but even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't true. He didn't know the biggest part of me, the part I'd hidden since we were kids. "Do I?" he asked, his gaze piercing. "Because it feels like you've been keeping something from me." My breath hitched. This was it, the moment I dreaded and dreamed of. I could tell him the truth, risk everything, or I could keep hiding. But the weight of his stare, the memory of his hand brushing mine at the bar, pushed me over the edge. "Caleb," I said, my voice barely steady, "I'm gay." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. His face didn't change, but his eyes softened, like he'd been waiting for me to say it. "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for a while." My heart stopped. "What?" He set his beer down, leaning forward. "I've seen the way you look at me, Ethan. I'm not blind. I didn't know what to do with it." I felt exposed, raw, like he'd peeled back my skin to see the truth underneath. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because I wasn't ready," he said. "I wasn't ready to face what it means. For you. For me. For you." I echoed, my mind racing. What was he saying? That he felt something too? Or that my feelings made him question himself? I needed answers, but fear kept me silent. He stood, pacing the small living room. "I've been thinking about that night in your apartment," he said. "When I walked in and you were, it wasn't just about you being naked. It was about seeing you, really seeing you for the first time." My cheeks burned, but I didn't look away. "And what did you see?" He stopped, his eyes locking on mine. "Someone I care about. Someone I don't know how to let go of." The air between us crackled. I wanted to cross the room, to close the distance, but I stayed rooted to the couch. "Caleb, what are you saying?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat back down, closer this time, his knee brushing mine. "I'm saying I'm confused," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life thinking I knew who I was. But being around you, it makes me question everything. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to tell him I loved him, that I'd loved him for years, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling. He didn't pull away. For a moment, we just sat there, hands clasped, the world outside his apartment fading away. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a beginning, a fragile, terrifying beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and unspoken truths. Caleb and I didn't talk about that night on his couch. But something had shifted. He'd text me late at night, asking me to meet him for coffee or a walk in the park. We'd talk about everything and nothing. His job, my art, the city. But the air between us was always heavy with what we didn't say. I tried to keep my distance, to protect myself, but every time I saw him, my resolve crumbled. He'd smile, his blue eyes crinkling, and I'd forget why I was supposed to stay away. But there was Sarah, his girlfriend, a constant reminder of the line I couldn't cross. She was kind, smart, everything he was supposed to want. And yet, he was spending more time with me than with her. One night, he showed up at my apartment unannounced, his uniform rumpled, his face drawn. "Rough shift," he said, collapsing onto my couch. "Can I crash here?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Always." He fell asleep on the couch, one arm slung over his face, his breathing slow and steady. I sat at my easel, sketching him in the dim light, the lines of his body soft and vulnerable. I wondered what it would be like to wake up next to him, to not have to hide how I felt. But then I thought of Sarah, of his badge, of the life he'd built, and the ache in my chest grew sharper. The next morning, he woke to find me still at the easel, my sketchbook open. He didn't say anything about the drawing, but his eyes lingered on it, a quiet acknowledgement. "You're really good, you know," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You see things other people don't." I wanted to tell him I saw him, every part of him, even the parts he hid from himself. But instead, I just smiled and offered him coffee. That afternoon, we walked through Central Park, the leaves turning gold and red around us. He was quieter than usual, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Sarah and I broke up," he said suddenly, his voice flat. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. "What? When?" "Last night," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Before I came to your place. It wasn't working. It hasn't been for a while." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask why, to push for answers, but another part was terrified of what those answers might be. So I just nodded, and we kept walking, the silence between us louder than ever. That night, he kissed me. It happened in my apartment, after too many beers and a conversation that had veered too close to the truth. He was sitting on my couch, his knee brushing mine, and then he leaned in, his lips soft and hesitant against mine. It was quick, barely a moment, but it set my world on fire. He pulled back, his eyes wide, like he'd shocked himself. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean." "Don't," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't apologize." He looked at me, his face a mix of fear and longing, and then he kissed me again, harder this time, his hands cupping my face. It was everything I'd ever wanted and everything I was afraid of, because I knew, even in that moment, that it wasn't simple. Not for him, not for us. The kiss changed everything. Caleb didn't stay the night, but he didn't run away either. He left with a promise to call, his eyes haunted but warm. I didn't sleep, my mind replaying that moment over and over, my lips still tingling from his touch. For a week, we danced around it. He'd show up at my apartment or the community center, his smile brighter but his eyes guarded. We didn't kiss again, but the tension between us was a living thing, pulling us closer even as we tried to keep our distance. One night, he invited me to a precinct fundraiser, a charity event at a local bar. I hesitated, unsure of my place in his world, but he insisted. "I want you there," he said, and the sincerity in his voice broke down my walls. The bar was packed with cops, their families, and community members. Caleb was in his element, shaking hands, laughing, his badge gleaming on his chest. I felt out of place, a painter in a sea of uniforms, but he kept me close, his hand brushing mine when no one was looking. Then I saw his dad, retired Sergeant Michael Reed, a man who'd always intimidated me with his stern gaze and booming voice. He cornered Caleb near the bar, his expression hard. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw the way Caleb's shoulders tensed, the way his dad's eyes flicked to me and narrowed. Later, in the alley behind the bar, Caleb told me the truth. "He knows," he said, his voice low. "About us. About me." My heart sank. "What did he say?" Caleb laughed, a bitter sound. "What do you think?" "He told me I'm throwing my life away, that I'm not his son if I do this." "Do what?" I asked, though I knew the answer. He looked at me, his eyes raw. "Choose you." The words hit me like a freight train. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to choose, that we could figure it out together. But the fear in his eyes stopped me. His dad, his job, his entire world, they were all tied to an identity he was starting to unravel. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his jaw tight. "I need time, Ethan," he said. "I need to figure this out." I nodded, my throat burning. "Take all the time you need," I said, but inside, I was screaming, because I knew time might mean losing him, not just as a lover, but as a friend. The next few days were torture. Caleb was distant, his texts short, his calls non-existent. I threw myself into my art, painting canvases filled with his face, his badge, the city that both bound us and tore us apart. I wondered if I'd pushed him too far, if my truth had broken something that could never be fixed. A week later, Caleb showed up at my apartment, his eyes red-rimmed, his uniform replaced by a hoodie and jeans. "I'm sorry," he said before I could speak. "I've been an idiot." I let him in, my heart in my throat. He sat on the couch, his hands clasped between his knees. "I talked to my dad," he said. "Told him I'm not ashamed of who I am, or who I love." My breath caught. "Caleb, I'm not saying it's easy," he interrupted, his voice fierce. "I'm scared, Ethan. My job, my family, they might never look at me the same. But I can't keep pretending. Not with you." Tears stung my eyes. I crossed the room, sitting beside him, our knees touching. "You don't have to do this alone," I said. "I'm here." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I'm here." We didn't kiss that night. Instead, we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. He told me about the fear that had kept him silent, the pressure to be the perfect son, the perfect cop. I told him about the years I'd spent hiding, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep because I thought he'd never see me the way I saw him. By the time the sun rose, we were still on the couch, our hands entwined. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no promises, no guarantees. But it was real and it was ours. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Caleb came out to his precinct, a decision that cost him some friends but earned him others. He started therapy, something I'd never thought he'd do. I painted more, my work bolder, brighter, filled with the hope I hadn't dared feel in years. But the world wasn't kind. We got stares on the street, whispers behind our backs. Caleb's dad stopped speaking to him, and I saw the pain that caused, even if he didn't talk about it. Still, we held on to each other, building something new in the ruins of what we'd left behind. 6 months later, we stood in my apartment, the same place where it all began. The badge was on the coffee table, no longer a barrier but a part of who Caleb was. A man who'd chosen love over fear, truth over expectation. My paintings lined the walls, a gallery of our journey, from the chaos of that first night to the quiet moments we now shared. We weren't perfect. There were fights, doubts, days when the world felt too heavy. But there were also mornings tangled in each other's arms, nights laughing over takeout, moments when his hand in mine felt like home. One evening, we walked through the village, the same streets where Caleb had once responded to a call that changed him. A rainbow flag fluttered above a bar, and he stopped, pulling me close. "I'm glad I found you," he said, his voice steady. "Not just as a friend, as everything." I smiled, my heart full. Me too. We didn't know what the future held. His job was still a battleground, and my art was a constant gamble. But we had each other, and that was enough. The badge, the city, the secrets, they'd shaped us, but they didn't define us. We defined ourselves, one moment, one choice, one love at a time. As we walked hand in hand, the city lights stretching out before us, I thought back to that night. The door swinging open, the badge hitting the floor, the moment that broke us open and made us whole. It wasn't the end of our story, but the beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next.